Hello, and this revision resource then is going to focus on Paper 1, Section B, the creative or narrative writing elements of an English GCSE test or English language GCSE test. Today we're going to focus on speech, how to use speech or dialogue in your writing. What is speech? Well, this is where two characters converse with each other, talk with each other, have a chat with each other. This then is likely to appear about halfway through your story. Just a reminder then of how this would look in the actual test. You'd be given 4 options, A, B, C, D, and you would choose one of these to write a story about. It focuses on AO5, communication and organisation, and AO6, vocab, sentence structure, spelling and punctuation. You get more marks, of course, for communication and organisation, where you're asked to write clearly, effectively and imaginatively. Here's a copy of the mark scheme then. As you can see, top marks or band 5, which is your grade 9 or so, and then pass mark would be around about top band 3, low band 4. About half marks would get you a pass in the GCSE test. You can see then it offers sentence structures vary to achieve particular effects there for band 4, and band 4 also asks for characterization to be convincing or in convincing detail. I think that's probably where the speech writing part comes in. You can't really have a convincing character without them playing off another character in your story, and indeed writing speech correctly or effectively adds a hell of a lot of punctuation and sentence structures to your work, so you get extra bonus marks for AO6. So using speech in your work. In order to be convincing, your story will probably contain speech. This is when one character talks to another. Let's have a look at this brief revision guide then for how to write speech.
Use quotation marks around direct speech, the actual words of the speaker. Sarah said, "Meet me after school." If the quote is a complete sentence, capitalize the first word. Place a comma before the first quotation mark. If the quote comes at the start of a sentence, place a comma before the second quotation mark. "Meet me after school," said Sarah. If the quote contains a question mark or an exclamation point, don't add a comma. "Come here now," said Anna. A sentence that has no actual spoken words does not need quotation marks. Sarah said that we should wait for her. Use quotation marks around direct speech, the actual words of the speaker. Sarah said, "Meet me after school."
I hope then that was a bit of revision of how the basics of how to write dialogue or speech in your writing. Here's another example then of somebody who's used dialogue within their particular piece of writing. What grade would it get? Well, not much. Maybe a grade 2. What information doesn't it include? How the words are actually said, what's going on outside of the words being spoken. And of course, description-wise, almost non-existent. You can see pretty much all the rules that we've just gone through in that song have been ignored. Now this dialogue comes from the film E.T. And as you're going to see from the clip, there's a lot more going on in this scene than just the words being used there.
Little Grover here will demonstrate by shitting himself 2 times.
2 times.
2 times, okay?
Can I start?
Okay, go ahead, Grover.
Okay, here we go.
Phone.
Yes, what a perfect day.
Phone.
No, not like in your brain. Ship. I think it came from outer space.
You want to call somebody?
As you can see, the dialogue then is written in this case much more like a script, which is not at all what we're looking for in that actual piece of narrative writing. Here's the much better version then, and please, as the clip is playing, read through how much better this piece of work actually is.
Little Grover here will demonstrate by shooting himself 2 times.
2 times.
2 times, okay?
Should I start?
Okay, go ahead, Grover.
Okay, here we go.
Phone.
Yes, what a perfect day.
Phone. Phone.
No, not like an airplane. Rocket ship. I think it came from outer space.
You want to call somebody?
So this particular candidate for the exam has described the situation around the dialogue. We've got how the dialogue is spoken. The layout is much more suited to a piece of narrative writing. In short, a lot stronger. What grade would it get? Probably around about a grade 6. What does it include? We've got a description of the set there, what the characters are doing as they're speaking, but equally the dialogue is close enough together that you don't lose track of the conversation. Here's then a basic piece of dialogue. We have the speech marks being used there with a capital letter at the beginning of the sentence. We have the punctuation mark, in this case an exclamation mark is before the closing speech marks. And you've got a full stop once we find out who said the dialogue itself. Now, to write dialogue really well, it's not just repeating the word said all the way through your work. What do you want now? She said. Instead, we have what do you want now? She sighed wearily. These are called tags and then adverbs to help describe how the character is feeling at the time of speaking. So some of these have been filled in for you, but obviously it's your character you're going to be talking about in your own story, so you'd want to include the emotions your particular character is going through. So for an example, we have the word tired to describe how the character is feeling, which means they could sigh as they speak, and they're talking wearily. That then would give you a piece of dialogue, and then 2 words to describe how that dialogue would be said. A good way of doing this is thinking, well, how would you want an actor to act if they read out your dialogue? Because they'd need some instruction from you as a director or writer to tell them exactly how you want the line performed. The narrative piece of writing would want to employ those same skills and write them down on the page next to the dialogue. Here's an example then from Roald Dahl, in this case Matilda, and a conversation between Miss Trunchbull and a student called Prudence. You can see immediately there the dialogue is split up across the page, and you can label the adverbs and the tags within this to say how the lines should be spoken. The rules then of basic dialogue would go as follows. There are 5 in total. Number 1, direct quotation begin with a capital letter. Jimmy shouted, comma, see you, notice the capital S, at the game. Is it true? Asked Cindy. Rule number 2, when a quotation is interrupted into 2 parts with words like he asked or the teacher demanded, the second part begins with a lowercase letter. What, beginning with a capital letter as it's the beginning of a sentence, are some of the things, Miss Baskin inquired, that make the school so much fun? The second half of the sentence, the second half of the dialogue, has not got a capital letter because it's continuing the sentence that began with what. One thing I like, comma, quotation mark, replied Sarah, comma, quotation mark, is the homework. Small case I for is, because it's the second half of the sentence. Rule number 3, when writing dialogue, all punctuation marks at the end of the quotation go inside the quotation marks. Let's visit museum, comma, suggested Samantha, full stop. John replied, didn't we go there last weekend? Question mark, end quotation. And but when we did, Beth added, we didn't see the ancient Egyptian exhibit, full stop, end quotation mark. So you put the punctuation in for the speech inside the quotation marks. Rule number 4, do not put a full stop at the end of a quotation followed by things like she said or mum asked. He explained, etc. Use commas, question marks, exclamation marks, but not a full stop. Full stops end sentences, whereas technically you haven't finished the sentence until you reach the end of the thought or the end of the way it would be said. My PE class is driving me crazy, exclamation mark, quotation mark, Paul yelled, full stop, and you can read the other example. Okay. And rule 5, I use a new line when a different person begins to speak. So each time you change speaker, you change paragraph or line. Okay, that's how when you look at it on the page, you should see all the speeches being split up rather than all forming a big block. Let's look again at an example. You'll see exactly what I just mentioned. The writing is split up as each person speaks. Roald Dahl has deliberately looked at how to create a character that's intimidating and nasty, and he's used particular describing words to emphasise that. So we've got dangerous and glittering, tiny and rather daft, emphasising the student in comparison with Miss Trunchbull. Those are in red. You can also see that the verb choices are being interesting used as well. We've got roved, snorted and piped to emphasise the qualities each character has as they're speaking. This means then Roald Dahl planned his answer first. He came up with a character and has used verbs, tags and adverbs to emphasise the character traits that character has. As you can see then, the next section of that dialogue, we've got words like dangerous, glittering, roved and snorted to describe the headmistress, and tiny, daft and piped to describe the student, deliberately contrasting the two as they have their conversation. Examiner feedback then for this section of the exam, that is the narrative part of the exam, for the 4 different questions they were set last year. And as you can see, those tend to criticise the lack of genuine dialogue going on or the lack of genuine storytelling going on in each answer. And the main findings were a lack of technical accuracy. Now, when you're talking about the speech, you've got to punctuate it accurately. But if you do, that adds lots of different kinds of punctuation to your work and lots of varied sentence structures as well. So actually, if done correctly, speech adds a lot of marks to your exam answer. Let's look at how to extend that a little bit further then. Recap of some things I've just said and some of the things you might want to watch out for when you're actually writing or practicing writing your own dialogue for your story.
When you are writing dialogue, you want to keep a good balance. If you just have dialogue for a long time without anything else, the reader is left very confused, not knowing what's happening or the tone of what they're saying or anything about the dialogue at all. On the other end of things, if you have too much action between the dialogue pieces, the reader will have a hard time remembering what's being said. Let me show you what I'm talking about. Here's an example with too much dialogue. Do you like fish? Yes, I do. That's wonderful. What's your favorite kind? I like goldfish. That's gross. I didn't mean it like that. I like you. You are funny. I think I'm starting to like you too. It tingles when you hold my hand like that. This is totally confusing and terribly written. It's just horrible. The reader wouldn't have any idea what's going on if you only have dialogue. It's made even worse if you have more than 2 characters speaking back and forth. It's harder to follow. You need to have those action and tone and what they're doing, how they're saying it, all in between there to make it make sense. Here's our other bad example of too much action. Do you like fish? John asked as he looked out over the big blue ocean. It had been years since he was last on the shores of this beautiful island, and he felt a mix of joy at returning, and sadness that he had been away for so long. He lowered his head and took a deep breath, then turned back to pulling on the rope that moved their boat slowly to the shore. Yes, she replied. So obviously, by the time you get her answer, you've almost forgotten what the question is because there's so much happening. This is an extreme example, but you can see the principle here. You want to have a balance of not too much action and not too much dialogue. Another note about dialogue is that you need to keep it real. Read the dialogue out loud. Perhaps have a friend read one part as you read another part. See if it makes sense. Is that the way that a real conversation would go? Would it logically go from one thing to the next? And also, note that different people speak differently. Some people have accents. Some people have different idioms that they use or words that they use differently. Try and incorporate that into your writing, and it will help to enhance your writing style. Let's take a look at this and see if it's realistic or not. Hello, Jill, Jack said with his head hanging down. Hi, she responded. I've had a really bad day. My mom ran out of water and I need someone to go up that hill there to fetch it with me. Is this realistic? Not really. Why is this not realistic? We've got that "hi, she responded." She's not caring about how he's reacting, and what she said would never lead a friend to telling about a bad day. So let's change her dialogue a little bit so that it's a little more realistic. "Hello, Jill," Jack said with his head hanging down. "What's wrong?" she asked, voice filled with concern. "I've had a really bad day. My mom ran out of water and I need someone to go up that hill there to fetch it with me." Now we have dialogue that flows a little bit more. It makes more sense, and it goes from one thing logically to the next.
As you can see then, a couple of things to look out for and some good techniques to practice when creating your dialogue to make sure it's realistic for the situation and the characters you're talking about. Bit of a trial at home then, once more. We've got our 4 exam sort of questions or exam tasks, A, B, C and D, down the right hand side. Some things to look out for of how you might grade it across the top. And now you're just looking at the speech you might use between the characters for each of these examples. How much should you write? No more than a side of A4 should involve speech, ideally maybe even a little bit less than that. And remember how it looks on the page. There should be lots of gaps between the characters speaking. If you've done it as a block, you've done it wrong. Also know that if each section is only 1 sentence long, it isn't realistic. So don't look out for writing too much in a block. But equally, look out for if your writing's too long, too short, and you're only writing 1 sentence for each person speaking, because that's not realistic for a real person's actual speech. Most of us say a lot more than 1 sentence at any given time. Check your work then. Make sure it's imaginative, uses the different senses. The vocab choices, in this case are tags and adverbs, should be quite advanced. Use a thesaurus if you're unsure, and it must be written well. So check back against the 5 rules I've gone through today. Check that you're using those correctly in your work, and you'll see your grade inflate because you've used them so accurately or so correctly, deliberately creating effects for your characters. Thank you very much then for listening to this recording. I hope it's been helpful.